gotta understand what you're reading. Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and recently I was having lunch with one of you guys who got a new job at the Pentagon. And like any professional, he's trying to get spun up on the details of the job and the policies that apply to it. And one of the points that came up in our conversation was that there is a difference between strategy and policy. Now, right away, let me be clear, both of these types of documents are important. And even though they perform different roles, they fit together. The other thing to keep in mind as I'm talking about strategy and policy documents is that it's not like they're separated on the bookshelf. They can often get lumped together in a way that blurs the line between the two of them. But to me, the big difference between strategy and policy is that strategy says yes and policy says no. Here's what I mean. Strategy documents tend to be written for an external audience. They tend to be optimistic, written with a can-do attitude, and list all the great things that the organization is going to accomplish in a very qualitative sense. A strategy document will often use exciting, ambiguous words without really getting into the details of how this will be accomplished. Strategy documents will talk about the soldier of the future. Policy, on the other hand, is aimed internally, usually at a specific group of insiders. It's dry, and while it's not necessarily pessimistic, it usually is just the facts. Policy documents lay out who can do what can't be done, and who must do what. To be fair, policy documents usually don't say what goal is supposed to be achieved, and they focus just on the details. This gets into how they fit together. Strategy documents point the way, while policy documents bound the path. I hesitate to say that strategy documents are ends and policy documents are ways in the ends, ways, and means paradigm of the war colleges. And that's because strategy documents never really have a happily ever after. They're often more about being ready for a specific possible future. Now, the dead giveaway between strategy and policy is structure. Policy document usually has numbered paragraphs and subparagraphs. It is hyper-specific and legalistic. On the other hand, strategy documents are written in something closer to plain English, and if a strategy document is difficult to read, it tends to be because it's vague. The other giveaway that you're reading a strategy document is when it uses phrases like this. The Air Force is at an inflection point. The Marine Corps faces an unprecedented threat. The Navy's future has never been more uncertain. For some reason, strategy documents often hype the drama of their particular point in history. Ooh, and my favorite, the number one priority is, there is literally a display in the Pentagon where the Army lists a number one priority and two top priorities. Anyways, how does this fit into your career and that goal of making a good first impression when you first show up? Well, first things first, you're going to want to familiarize yourself with what's important to your leadership. Even if your senior rater doesn't give you an initial counseling, you can corner them and ask what strategy documents you should read. Second, your organization probably has a grumpy old man who's upset about how some policy is implemented or interpreted. I would invest some time to understand whatever that policy is. The odds are your organization doesn't have anybody but that grumpy old man who understands it. And of course, nobody listens to him because he's grumpy. And your organization is probably somehow negatively impacted by how that policy gets implemented. Now, the third way to leverage these strategy and policy documents is when it's time for you to write. You use strategy documents to say yes and policy documents to say no. You use strategy documents to justify change, and you use policy documents to resist change. You use strategy documents to let someone do something, but you use policy documents to make them do something. You use strategy documents to expand and acquire power. And you use policy documents to consolidate and hold that power. One final thought about strategy and policy is that if you're going to misspeak, it's less damaging to misspeak about strategy. In my view, a lot of strategy boils down to do good work and get good outcomes. So if you misspeak, you might be wrong about the words, but you're probably not wrong about the spirit. But if you misquote policy to people who know that policy, that is not good for your reputation. So when it comes to policy, stick to what you know for certain, quote the exact text, and admit when you could be wrong. Now, if you want an example of a policy that's worth understanding, watch this video on the Anti-Deficiency Act, or what's commonly called the color of money.